Good morning. Let us begin. So this week's Parsha is called Pekudei. It's the last of the Parshas of the book of Exodus. So at the end of this week, we will be 2/5 of the way through the Torah, 3/5, 3 more books to go. And this week begins, Pekudei means counting, the counting of the Mishkan. It tells us exactly how much gold, silver, copper was used in the Mishkan. They used 30 talents, just under 30 talents of gold. A talent is about kikar. A talent is about 2,000 ounces. 2,000 ounces. So 30 times that, right? So that's 60,000 ounces. A lot of gold and 100 kikar, 100 talents of silver, and 70 talents of copper. So there was a lot of gold, silver, and copper in this Mishkan, along with the various forms of fabrics and wood that was used in the Mishkan. Then it tells us how the clothing of last week we learned about how the various utensils in the Mishkan were made. Now it tells us how the clothing of the Mishkan was made. The clothing was made for the priest, for the Kohanim and the high priest. Then it tells us how now that the Mishkan was completed, everything was brought to Moshe, and Moshe kind of goes through each thing and lists each thing that was made. And then it tells us how they erected the Mishkan. They stood up the Mishkan. Moshe told them, don't start the service in the Mishkan. We're going to start it on the 1st of the month of Nisan, which will be just under a year from when they left Egypt, which would be, they essentially waited a few months to actually start the use of the Mishkan. And then it tells when they did build the Mishkan, the cloud of glory settled over it, and it was a sign that God's presence was found in the Mishkan. So that is our Parsha in short. Today is Rosh Chodesh. It is the first of the second Adar. We have 2 Adars this year, as it's a leap year. I explained previously that we have... I explained previously that this year, because the Jewish calendar is on an average 354 days, and the lunar calendar starts 354 days, the solar calendar is on average 365 and a quarter days, and so it's about 11 and a quarter days off, and so every 2 to 3 years we add an extra month to match up so that our Passover will always be in spring and Sukkot will always be in fall. And so because of that, we have an extra month this year. So we have 2 Adars. And so we have the second Adar begins the 30th of the last month is today. And the second and the first of the next month will begin tomorrow. So today is Rosh Chodesh. It's a minor celebration every new month. And 2 weeks from today is going to be Purim. We're going to have we'll have a Purim party here for our morning class. We'll read the Megillah here, and we'll spend a few minutes talking about Purim and doing the various mitzvot of Purim. So that will be in 2 weeks from today. One other thing I should mention quickly before we get into our topic for today is that this coming Thursday we have a survivor from the horrific attacks in Israel on October 7th, along with the brother of one of the hostages is going to be here on Thursday. So if you want to come meet them, hear them, come join us this Thursday. So let me take questions.
The brother is still a hostage?
Unfortunately, hopefully by Thursday he'll be out.
You're going to be in this room or this room?
I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Depends on how many people. Any
questions on the Parsha? All right, so let's get straight to our topic for today. So our topic for today is Chareidim, or what are Chareidim? So Chareidim, as it's often pronounced, is a common term that's used to describe Jews that observe Torah law, live by Torah values, and reject some parts of modern life that they feel are not compatible with Torah law and values. Chareidim generally, though not always, take a stricter view on halacha, on Jewish law, while much of halacha is clear-cut. Most of Jewish law is clear-cut, and we've done some classes on the development of Jewish law. But there are often debates on what the halacha, what the law should be, and one could take kind of a stricter view or a more lenient view. Chareidim tend to take the stricter view. Again, not always. Chareidim are not a monolithic group, so not all do the same thing. Chareidim generally live on their own in somewhat insular communities, going to their own synagogues, sending their children to their own schools, and involved with their own culture. Now, the term Chareidi comes from the Hebrew word chared, which means to fear, and it refers to Chareidim lidvar Hashem, God-fearing. It means that they're God-fearing, they fear God, which has always been a great Jewish value, that a person should be God-fearing. In other words, afraid to do the wrong thing, not want to go against what God tells them. The name came to refer to these more what we could call traditionalist communities, culturally traditionalist communities, over the past 70 years or so. It's not clear how it evolved. The term first probably became to use in Israel from the Eidah HaCharedit. Eidah HaCharedit means God-fearing community, and that is the official name of the official anti-Zionist community in Jerusalem. The Eidah HaCharedit represents only a very small segment of the Haredi community, and most Haredim are not anti-Zionist, but yet for some reason they became known, probably after this community became known in general as Haredim. Here in the United States, or in English-speaking countries, the Haredi community are often called ultra-Orthodox. That's an offensive term. Using the term ultra to define any group is not a nice thing. That should be self-understood, right? Nobody wants to be ultra anything. And virtually no Haredim will define themselves as ultra-Orthodox. Unfortunately, leading media organizations in this country refuse to, although they no longer use the N-word or other offensive words to refer to various groups, they refuse to recognize that the term ultra-Orthodox is offensive, although it plainly is, just by the term ultra being in it, and they continue to use it. That is almost certainly because of the huge amount of anti-Haredi bigotry in this country, particularly among the elite in this country, particularly in the city of New York, where most Haredim live and where most major media groups are based. And this has led, by the way, to an extremely bigoted view of Haredim in the media and in popular culture, which of course filters out all over. Sometimes Haredim are called Hasidim, or an anglicized version of Hasidim. As we'll see, some Haredim are Hasidim, but Hasidim is a very distinct group. Within Haredim, not all Haredim are Hasidim. So Haredim are not a single organized group. There is no official, membership that makes you Haredi. It's not an official group. Haredi is singular, Haredim plural. It's not a single group, and there's no clear, obvious way to define Haredi. Haredim are a mix of dozens, if not hundreds, of different Jewish communities. They make up, according to sociologists that study Haredim, about 1.5 to 2 million Jews. So they're a very significant percentage of the Jewish community today, about 13% of Jews in the world. Each of these hundreds of communities, 1.5 to 2 million Jews, are different, unique in their own way. And there are many Jews and Jewish communities that kind of straddle the very wide and muddled divide between Haredim and non-Haredi Jews. Non-Haredi observant Jews are often referred to as modern Orthodox, but there isn't, again, clear classifications between what is Haredi and what is not. Social scientists like to generalize groups because it allows us to understand them and how they work. But you have to recognize that people are complicated, and people, and even communities of people, don't usually fit into nice, neat groups and definitions. So what are Haredim like? So Haredim generally follow Jewish traditions. They are observant of Jewish law. The term for observant Jews are often called in English Orthodox. Often Orthodox as a term for observant Jews is used mistakenly alongside as a stream of Judaism or a denomination of Judaism alongside other denominations such as conservative and reform. I've done a class about this before. We spoke about, I think I called it the fragmentation of Judaism. The Firstly, there's no such thing as denominations in Judaism. To be clear, all Jews are one people. We're one and the same. There are various belief systems among Jews that are organized in different groups. There is no organized Orthodox Judaism. It doesn't exist. It hasn't ever, not in this country, nor in virtually any other place today. So there is no such thing. It's rather a term used to define observant Jews, or Jews that do their best most of the time, or at least outwardly, keep the commandments of the Torah. Of course, everyone has lapses. Nobody is perfect. But the term Charedi, too, is, of course, people who generally follow Jewish traditions, although many of them, unfortunately, have lapses as well, right? Some more than others. And they follow the Jewish laws of dress and the Jewish laws of separation of men and women. Now, we've done a previous class on tzniut, on the Jewish laws of dress. Judaism is very clear on how a person has to be dressed. The laws of tzniut, as we spoke about in our class on tzniut, on Jewish dress and Jewish behavior, that is the laws of tzniut is probably the thing that most strongly is at it most strongly contradicts our modern Jewish culture, or most strongly doesn't fit with modern Jewish culture. But it is Torah law. Chareidim, however, follow the Jewish laws of dress usually in a stricter way, because Jewish laws of dress tend to be very different from modern culture. So many Jews, even observant Jews, take more lenient views. The Chareidim don't do that. Usually take stricter views when it comes to halachic dress requirements, including the way women dress. And the same is also in regard to mixing between men and women. Jewish law has very strict rules about gender separation, and Chareidim usually, again, take stricter views in that also, which, again, is in contrast to Western society that is very permissive, both in mode of dress and in interaction between genders. So Haredi women are usually fully covered in accordance with stricter views of Jewish dress. And really the way people have dressed historically, the way especially women dress nowadays in modern Western countries is very different than the way they dressed prior to World War I, or a little over 100 years ago. It was unheard of for women to wear short sleeves or short shorts. Was unheard of. And men to wear shorts was probably not very common either. So women follow these kind of traditions, the way Jews historically dress. They usually wear skirts or dresses down to their knees. They usually have sleeves covering their elbows, so their arms are not bare. Their chest is covered up to their neck, and they usually wear socks or stockings. Married Haredi women, in accordance with Jewish law, cover their hair, either by wearing a snood or a cap or a kerchief on their head, or many, if not most, Haredi women, married women wear wigs to cover their hair, natural wigs of natural hair that look very natural. Men, of course, wear yarmulkes, as all observant Jewish men do, and often dress in formal clothing, though not always. Often we wear button-down shirts, dress shirts, but very often white shirts, jackets. Many Haredim wear black fedora hats. Some Hasidic Jews wear long jackets that go down to their knees or down to their ankles, the way they wore in the old country. On Shabbat and festive occasions, many Hasidic Jews wear fur hats or shtreimels, big fur hats, or spodiks, which were Eastern European noble artists, which were what the noblemen wore in Eastern Europe. So the clothing of the Haredim vary really from community to community, from person to person. Many Haredim men wear beards, but not all. And the reason for the men's clothing is not a requirement, which is why it's not the same and they're all different, and not all Haredim wear distinctive clothing. And the reason for that is that many Haredim would like to retain a distinct look, to keep themselves distinct, culturally distinct from the world around them.
Is that one of the reasons why you don't shave your beard and mustache?
I don't shave, no.
That's what I mean, is that what
Yes, well, we've done a class about shaving in Judaism in general. There's a debate about, there's certain prohibitions about shaving. We're forbidden from shaving with a razor. Historically, Jews had beards, and according to Kabbalah, one should have a beard, and therefore Hasidim all have beards. And as a Chassid, I don't cut my beard. I don't. Can I?
But can you?
Again, it's not forbidden under Jewish law, but Hasidic Jews we have full beards in accordance with the teachings of Kabbalah, that the beard represents God's mercy. That it's a subject of God's mercy, but it's a subject of its own for another time. So Jewish law has rules about separating men and women. Jewish law requires separation between men and women in prayer and in public places. It also forbids men and women from touching or being alone together unless they are family. So, and we've done some classes about men and women touching and separation in the synagogue. Of course, any sexual activity or any affection outside of marriage is physical affection, is forbidden between men and women, is forbidden by Jewish law. Now, modern culture has removed most of these traditional separations between men and women. However, Jewish law remains constant. So any Jew observant in Jewish law will retain these laws. However, Chareidim follow, but sometimes they use workarounds or the like, or leniencies. Chareidim follow the letter of the law, keeping total separation between men and women. Not only are their synagogues separate, as all traditional synagogues following halacha, any halachic observant synagogue will have men and women separated, and they don't touch, as all observant Jews would do, but also in Haredi communities, men and women are separated in most other areas of life, social areas, that is. That means that schools are separate for boys and girls. They have totally separate schools. Unmarried boys and girls are discouraged from any social interaction except for dating for marriage. So social events, and remember, this is the way our grandparents had lived, right? Social events are usually separated. Men and women are separated for social events, for weddings, bar mitzvahs, and other social events. Men and women are separated. In general, social mingling between men and women is frowned upon. So since boys and girls don't meet at social events and don't meet in school, so dating for marriage is usually arranged, whether by family members that introduce them or through a shadchan, through a traditional matchmaker. And the dating period is relatively short. It varies very much from individual to individual, depending on what every couple feels, they feel comfortable with. But once engaged, they usually get married fairly quickly because, again, Jewish law forbids any touching or show of affection before marriage. So because of that, they usually, once a couple do love each other and want to get married, they usually get married fairly quickly. So Chareidim also usually marry fairly young through these arranged shidduchim or arranged dates, usually depending on the community, depending on the individual, in the very late teens, 18, 19, but usually young or early 20s. But again, not always. There's no rules, and again, Chareidim are not a monolithic group. So Jewish values encourage us to have children. In fact, the first mitzvah of the Torah is Pru Uravu, be fruitful and multiply. It's the first of our 613 commandments. And we are commanded to have children, encouraged to have children. Jewish law also frowns on using contraceptives. It is allowed under certain conditions, but there is no kind of blanket, whoever wants can use it at any time, but rather, depending on a particular individual situation, there's complex laws of when we do and don't use it. So as a result, most Chareidim have large families. It varies for many reasons. Many people naturally are not highly fertile and that will not have a lot of children. Many couples, unfortunately, struggle with infertility. We've done classes on that as well. And so for various reasons, some people have a hard time raising children or have other issues. And so not all Haredi families are large, but many Haredi families are large. It's not rare to see families with 10 or even 15 children. So now raising a large family is a great blessing, but it also comes with its own challenges. It's expensive. It takes a lot of energy. It's very time consuming. And so for Chareidim with large families, and again, not all Chareidim have large families, so those that do have large families, a big part of the focus of the of the adult life is focused on your family. And it means that you have different priorities because your expenses are spent on having more children than perhaps vacations or other things that you may spend your money on. But it's a priority for them. They prefer to spend on or invest in larger families. You have less time for hobbies because you're raising larger families. It also creates, though, a very close-knit large family that then grows up and often lives near each other. And then you have cousins. You could have dozens, if not over 100 cousins that are all close living nearby, and hundreds of second cousins. So much of our modern culture is very problematic for Jewish law and Jewish values. And it's particularly true, one particular part of culture that is at odds with Jewish law and Jewish values is the lack of tzniut, or modesty, and the highly sexualized culture that we live in. And for that reason, Chareidim are generally not involved in many parts of modern culture because of the lack of tzniut, modesty, and the sexualization that we have in our culture. Most Chareidim don't have televisions at home. Again, not all, there's no rule for Chareidim, they're not all the same. Most don't watch movies. Again, not all, but most. Most don't listen to popular music for the same reason, because a lot of it is highly sexualized. They generally won't read popular novels and books and magazines as well. In recent decades, Chareidim, as the Haredi community, has really, really grown in recent decades. Remember, most Jews historically were lived like this 100 years ago, 150 years ago. They were decimated in the Holocaust. And the Haredi community was small following the Holocaust because most Jews in the United States and other Western countries had assimilated, had moved away from observant life. And so the Haredi community has really grown thanks in recent decades, thanks to natural birth and thanks to many Jews returning to Jewish traditions and adopting a Haredi way of life. So as a result, Chareidim have built their own alternative modern culture. So today there are many Haredi newspapers, magazines, many Haredi books, novels in Hebrew, in English, and in Yiddish, which are the primary languages spoken by Haredi communities. Most Haredim live either in Israel, where most of them speak Hebrew, or in the United States or other Anglo countries like Canada, England, Australia, South Africa, where they speak mostly English, and a number of Haredi communities speak Yiddish. There's also a very large Jewish music industry that caters just to the Haredi community, and there's even a small but growing Haredi film industry. That Haredi provide essentially their own entertainment and their own culture for themselves within their own standards, following Jewish values. Haredim go on vacations like anyone else, but prefer to go to kosher places, because they do go to non-kosher places too, but it's a lot easier if you go to kosher places. And as a result, there's been a huge growth in kosher retreats and cruises that offer glatt kosher food and kosher entertainment with Haredi entertainers that fit the Haredi lifestyle. And there are many, many of these retreats, even hotels here in the United States, in Europe, in Israel, as well as they'll do retreats. They'll take over a hotel for a week or two at different times, and then people will go to these hotels with their families. It's especially true for Pesach, for Passover. Passover is very expensive to do and a lot of work. And it's really easy if you could go away to a retreat. There's been a proliferation in Passover retreats in recent years. Today there are dozens of these Passover retreats around here in the United States, through all over Europe, really everywhere, in every destination you can think of, kosher Haredi Passover retreats, and many Haredim go. Now, Haredim generally embrace the use of modern technology, so long as it doesn't challenge Torah values. So Chareidim have modern kitchens, usually very modern kitchens because they cook a lot, they have large families, they make Shabbat dinners and holiday dinners, and so usually very modern kitchens with all the amenities you can think of, drive cars, use every modern gadget. However, they avoid things that are problematic to Haredi lifestyle, such as televisions, because it provides a culture that Haredim want to avoid. Now, Haredim are split over the use of the internet. There is a significant segment of the Haredi community that have regular internet access in their homes and smartphones, some with filters. This is evidenced by the large number of Haredi media sites and other sites selling Haredi clothing and the like all over the internet. There are some segments of the Haredi community that frown on internet use and avoid its use entirely. Today, it's almost impossible to avoid internet use. They only use it at work or only use it in a limited fashion. In some of these communities, people don't use smartphones at all. They use what we call today dumb phones, the phones that only talk and text, so that they don't have easy access to the internet. Now, virtually all Haredi children go to Haredi schools. There are hundreds of such schools in the United States, in Israel, and in other Haredi communities. All Haredi schools separate boys and girls. Now, all Haredi schools in the United States and most in Israel teach general subjects. Here in the United States, English, math, science, but there's a very strong emphasis on Torah subjects. And that's because for Chareidim, our primary life is Judaism, Torah and Judaism. That's the center of Haredi life. Everything else is important, but secondary, and so therefore you want your children first and foremost to study Torah. That's the most important thing. They should also get an education, but that's secondary. And so as a result, the general education isn't always the best quality. This varies dramatically from school to school. Some schools have top-of-the-line education. Some have education that's okay, but not, what you'll get in an elite private school, but easily matching the public schools, which in many large cities, unfortunately, are all failing, such as in Los Angeles. And some have weaker general education, but parents voluntarily choose to send their children to these schools because they want the strong Jewish education, which is much, much more important to them. So most Chareidim, after they finish school, then the boys continue on in yeshivas, the girls continue on in seminaries, which are usually mostly full-time study of Torah. In Israel, here in the United States, in other places, many Haredi boys continue in yeshiva for a number of years. Some of them will take college classes on the side at night. Some yeshivas even have programs that allow for part-time college classes. Many Haredim will just study in yeshiva for a number of years. And then, depending, it varies, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, more sometimes. Some Haredim go to college. Many do not. Some, like I said, do it while they're in yeshiva or in seminary. Some Haredim take school. Most Haredim that do, some go to regular colleges. Most do not. Most, if they'll go to a college, they'll go to more career-oriented colleges that are, or night colleges, or where they can work during the day, or online schools. And there's a Haredi school that was created for exactly that purpose, Turo College. You may have heard of it. It's a very, very large school. It's a career school. In other words, it's focused almost exclusively on training for careers. So almost all the courses that it offers is training for careers. It doesn't have campuses with dorms, so it doesn't have a college, like many of the for-profit colleges. It doesn't have, although Turo is a nonprofit, it doesn't have college campus or anything. It rather, kind of is in buildings all over. They have branches here in Los Angeles. It's really all over the country now. And not everyone who attends Turo College is even Jewish today. It's a very, very large school. But they offer courses in just about anything that any college, they offer college courses in just about anything that you need. But college courses were built for Chareidim to provide that career opportunity without getting the college campus experience. And many Chareidim do go there to Turo or its very many different branches. So while Haredim live mostly in their own communities and go to their own schools, they still, of course, interact with Jews and non-Jews around them. They're still living in the world. Most Haredim work in the general workforce, which requires interaction with others. Many Haredim have social connections or family connections, especially with other Jews. Many Haredim have relatives that are not Haredim. Some Haredim and Chabad, which is generally considered, it's a Hasidic community, a Haredi community, has open centers all over the world, including this one, to provide for other Jews. So many Chareidim interact with other Jews at all times, regularly, and even provide for other Jews. And anyone who spent a Shabbos dinner with in a Haredi home or interacted with them knows that Chareidim of all stripes are generally very nice, very generous people. People often write how describe how they're surprised, right? They met Chareidim and they dealt with them and they were very nice people. They expect them for some reason not to be nice, because people often have negative stereotypes when they see groups that look different from a distance. That's very common. You see someone who looks different, acts different, you have a negative stereotype, but at the heart, they're humans, they're regular people, they're Jews, they're nice people. Now, Chareidim are very generally very generous and have many charitable organizations. The Torah encourages us to be kind and to give tzedakah, so they're extremely generous. Firstly, Chareidim support their own communities, their own synagogues and schools. The Haredi students are all going to private schools. Those schools are supported by their own communities. It's very expensive to support their own schools. It varies from place to place. Here in the United States, Chareidim get almost no public funding, and so very, very little public funding. And so they need to support themselves. In other countries, perhaps they get more. Once they support themselves, they also have charitable organizations that help their own communities and beyond. Some of the organizations that Chareidim have built that exist in virtually every place where there are Chareidim is Hatzalah. You may have heard of Hatzalah. Hatzalah is an ambulatory service that exists here in Los Angeles, mostly in West LA. It's all over the tri-state area, New York area, in Florida, but really in many, many other communities where there are Haredi communities. And it's an ambulatory service open to the public that essentially it's volunteers that have EMT training. They usually have ambulances as well, and they have regular jobs, regular careers, and they have essentially beepers or radios that call, and whoever's closest runs to a call, and they're able to get there much, much faster than regular ambulances or fire department who are usually stationed in a fire station or in a particular place, and they're not all over, since Hatzalah volunteers are really all over the community in any given time, and just going about their daily lives. They're usually very, very close when there's a call, and so they could be there much, much, much faster, and they save countless lives. They have their ambulances are usually not parked in a garage, but are usually parked on the street all over again. And the Hatzalah members have keys to the ambulances, and they could just jump into the closest ambulance if there's a need for ambulances. Others just run with their own, just with a bag of equipment, and will be able to save lives that way. And they save countless lives. Yes?
Don't they wear white socks?
Some. I'll talk about the Haredi dress. Well, I did talk about it, but some. They all dress differently. There's a lot of different traditions. There's very different. Chareidim dress very different. Some just dress like everybody else. But again, they dress with tzniut, with modesty. But, right, some just wear regular clothing.
I was told because it's from the olden days.
Some Hasidic Chareidim wear white socks, yes.
Most in England, in Manchester?
In Manchester there are Chareidim, yes.
That's how they
Yes.
dress.
Another organization that Chareidim have built in Israel is an organization called Zaka. Zaka was built in response to terrorism, but it's really whenever people die whenever people die in an unnatural way, they'll go and they'll essentially clean up afterwards. It's a mitzvah to make sure that no body parts are left behind. And so after accidents and the like, they clean up. And so they help in a lot of difficult situations. So that's another organization. There's an organization essentially that called Chareidim that helps for essentially a free AAA, where volunteers will go and help someone whose car breaks down. There's There's organizations for children with special needs. There's a special camp, HASC, for children with special needs. There's an organization, a High Lifeline, for people who lose a loved one or who go through terminal illness, to deal with terminal illness. There's organizations called Bikur Cholim, which helps people who have sick relatives or who are sick with medical equipment, with helping people with, they have apartments here in Los Angeles, they have apartments near Cedars-Sinai. People can stay if they have a loved one in the hospital, that they can, and they want to stay nearby, and they help with meals for people who have who are sick and the like. So these are just some of, they also, most Haredi communities have what we call gemachs, which are free loan societies, which give out loans. They have groups that help with burial, the Chevra Kadisha, the Holy Society. In Israel, there's a very large medical organization that helps with medical needs, a volunteer organization called Yad Sarah. So they build organizations to help the general public. And Chareidim are known to build that. And there are many, many, many such organizations, some of which are very large. And which really, whenever a family's in trouble, if someone's in trouble, if someone's in need of help, they're there to help them. And many of these organizations don't just service the Haredi community, but service the community at large. Any questions? Yes?
Is there a list somewhere of these organizations and what they do?
I think there are online, but I don't know offhand. I think there are.
About them if you're looking for a particular thing.
I guess you got to ask or Google, but they'll have websites. But there probably is, but I don't know.
Just Google Jewish organizations.
Mm-hmm. Jewish aid organizations. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yes.
Where's the biggest community of the Haredi?
I'm going to talk about that. Excellent question. So why do Chareidim choose to live the way they do? So for Chareidim, their life revolves around Torah and Judaism. In other words, Torah is at the center of their life. They're normal, regular people. They enjoy the same things everybody else enjoys. Enjoy, dressing nice. Enjoy vacations. Enjoy everything anyone else enjoys. But for them, Torah is centered to their life, and Jewish practice is centered to their life. It's more important than financial success. Everyone wants to be successful, but Torah is more important than culture, more important than education, more important than hobbies, more important than things are to the average non-Haredi. So therefore, they have larger families. They send their children to Jewish schools. They live in Haredi communities. It means that they have to forego some luxuries and hobbies and interests that maybe other people have, but they prefer that. That's their choice to live like that. They choose to live a Torah-centered lifestyle because they value it. It means more to them than other things. So the Chareidim, as I said multiple times already, are not monolithic. It's not a single group. There's no single organization. There's no single membership. There's no real way to define Haredi. There are today universities that have within their Jewish studies departments have endowment chair professors that focus on Haredi lifestyle. However, and study it for a living. There are people that do that, believe it or not. But they're not monolithic. But to generalize, Haredim in general are split into three different groups, all about of equal number. So first group is Hasidim. Hasidim are part of one of hundreds of different Hasidic groups. We've done some class on Hasidim. Hasidism was a movement that started about 300 years ago in Eastern Europe. Majority of Eastern European Jews before the Holocaust were probably Hasidic. But today, it's about a third of Haredi Jews are Hasidic. But there's many, many different groups of Hasidim. There are some groups of Hasidim they come from various different places across Eastern Europe. Some have Hungarian background, and so they have more Jewish Hungarian traditions. Some have a Russian background, have more Jewish Russian traditions. Some have a Polish background, have more Jewish Polish traditions. Some of the major Hasidic groups include Satmar, which is probably the largest Hasidic group. It's based in Williamsburg in Brooklyn and Monroe in upstate New York. In There's Skver, which is in a large Hasidic group originally from Ukraine, Satmar is originally from Hungary, Romania, or Transylvania. Skver is based in New Square, New York, in upstate New York. Babov is a Hungarian group based in Borough Park. Vizhnitz is a Hungarian or also really Romanian group based in Israel and in Monsey, New York, in Rockland County in upstate New York. Ger is an original Polish Hasidic group based in Israel. Chabad is one you're familiar with, a group that I'm part of, and it's based in Crown Heights in Brooklyn, but there are Chabad communities and centers all over. Another large Hasidic group is Belz, which is based in Jerusalem, mostly in Israel, but found all over, particularly in Europe. And so that's the Hasidic groups, but there are dozens, if not hundreds, of other smaller Hasidic groups based here in the United States, in Israel, and in other Haredi communities. About another third of the Haredi community are what's called Litvish, which are non-Hasidic Ashkenazim of Eastern European descent. Not all Litvish literally means Lithuanian. Not all Litvish are from Lithuania by any means. But they're called that because their communities revolve around the Lithuanian-style yeshivas. So the yeshiva, which is kind of the advanced schools, are the center of these communities. They're centered around yeshivas and yeshiva life. And so, there are various communities centered around various yeshivas. And the yeshivas are in this unique Lithuanian style of schools that developed in the 19th century in Lithuania, but of which there are hundreds of such schools today. So there are many Litvish communities all over. The largest here in the U.S. is probably in Lakewood, which is centered around Beth Medrash Gavoa, which is the largest school yeshiva in the country. But there are large Litvish communities in Flatbush in Brooklyn, Flatbush Midwood in Brooklyn, in Monsey, New York, in Long Island, in just outside of New York City, with the area called Five Towns, in Far Rockaway, in Staten Island, in cities around northern New Jersey. There's a little bit in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia, not a lot. And there's various communities around the country. There are Haredi communities in Los Angeles, there's very large in Florida, in Chicago, in Boston, in Baltimore is a very large Haredi community. So the Haredim are all over, really all over the world. I'll get to that in a moment. And then the third group are Sephardim that come from a Sephardic background, and they're about a third of Chareidim or Sephardim. Most Sephardi Chareidim live in Israel, all around Israel, in various Haredi communities. There is a small Sephardi Haredi community here in the United States, fairly small, mostly living either in Brooklyn, in Midwood in Brooklyn, or in Deal, New Jersey. On the Jersey Shore. So there are some of the Hasidic communities are predominantly Yiddish speaking. Most Haredim speak their local language. So of the Hasidim, not all, I don't know what percentage, within their individual communities, their spoken language is Yiddish, but most Litvish and many Hasidic and Sephardic speak the local language. In Anglo countries, that would be English. In Israel, that would be Hebrew. In Europe, it's mostly Yiddish. Most Haredim. In England, it's English, but in other countries in Europe, it's mostly Yiddish, except for in France. In France, most Haredim are Sephardic, and they speak French. And Haredim are very, very different. Some don't go to college at all. Some ban internet access. Others go to college and have smartphones, right? Some Haredim, particularly a segment of the Litvish community, believe that men should ideally spend a significant part of their life studying Torah full time. So within that segment of the Litvish community, people will spend 10, 20 years, Jewish men will spend 10, 20 years of their life just studying Torah. And they live on meager stipends. Usually their wife works to support themselves. Sometimes they have family support, and they'll do this for 1 or 2 decades. Most Haredi men spend a few years in yeshiva and then go to college or become entrepreneurs and get jobs and go to work in their early 20s, as most people do. So it's very different. It includes, again, Chareidim, many different communities, all of whom are fairly different. So there's an estimated, again, demographers have a hard time answering. They don't ask you on the census if you're a Haredi. And so there's no clear way to define it. They could define it based on synagogue membership or based on number of children in Haredi schools. But demographers think there are about 2 million Haredim in the world, or about 13% of a world Jewish population of 15 million or so. So it's a significant minority of the Jewish community. Almost all of them, meaning more than 90%, live in the United States and Israel. So, or more than 95%. About 1.3 million live in Israel, right, where they make up about 17% of the Jewish population, and about 700,000 live in the United States, right, where they make up also about 12% of the Jewish population. Now, in the United States, about 90% of Chareidim live in the New York area, which means although most Jews in the United States live in the New York area, but within the New York area, Chareidim make up a much larger percentage of the overall Jewish population. So while in Los Angeles, they're a very small percentage, a very tiny percentage of the Jewish population, in the New York area, in some areas in New York City itself, they number maybe 25% or more of the Jewish population. And in other cities, the entire city is Haredi. So in the New York area, they live in New York City. A very big percentage live in New York City, mostly in Brooklyn, in various neighborhoods of Brooklyn, Williamsburg, Flatbush, Midwood, Borough Park, Crown Heights, as well as in Queens, Far Rockaway, Long Island, in New York City, also in the Lower East Side. There's a old Haredi community in Long Island, in Rockland County, which is just north of New York City. There's a very large Haredi community. Muncie is a large Haredi city there in northern New Jersey, in western Connecticut. But outside of the New York area, there are significant Haredi communities in Baltimore, in Florida, in Chicago, here in Los Angeles, and there are dozens of very small Haredi communities all across the United States. Every major city in the United States has some sort of Haredi community. In Israel, Haredim live in Jerusalem, where they're about a third of the population, in Bnei Brak, where they're about almost 100% of the population, Beit Shemesh, where they're a little over 50%, Modi'in Ilit, Beitar Ilit, both cities that are all Haredi, Elad, another city that's all Haredi, Ashdod, where they make up a majority of the population. There are also smaller Haredi communities in almost every city in Israel. Outside of Israel, there are Haredi communities in Europe. There's a very significant Haredi community in London. England has a very large percentage of British Jews are Haredi. About a third of British Jews, a quarter or a third of British Jews today are Haredim. They live a very large community in London, a small community in Manchester, and a very small community in Gateshead. There's also a significant Haredi community in Antwerp. There's a large Sephardic Haredi community in France, and there's various small Haredi communities in Amsterdam, in Vienna, in other cities around Europe as well. They're also in Canada. There's a very large Haredi community in Toronto and in Montreal. There's a Haredi community in Mexico City, in Buenos Aires, in Sao Paulo, in Brazil, in Buenos Aires, Argentina, in Sao Paulo, in Brazil, in Johannesburg, in South Africa, and in Melbourne, in Australia, where I grew up. But they're mostly centered, as we said, in New York and in Israel. Any questions? Yes?
I heard that in Israel, the Haredi who who are doing the Torah studies instead of working are paid by the government?
Excellent question. What about the Chareidim in Israel who are paid by the government? So I couldn't conclude without bringing up the various controversies that have come up with Chareidim. But let me start with the United States, which is the largest Haredi community, which is the second largest Haredi community, and where we live. So every community, including Chareidim, have their problems and their problematic characters. That exists everywhere. Over the years, there were various Chareidim who have been caught doing unsavory things. And of course, their being Jewish and their Haredi background is played up. Of course, look at this ultra-Orthodox, they like to call them, right? Offensive term, Jew. Look what they've done, right? And so there's, of course, bad apples in every community and in the Haredi communities as well. Haredi communities also, like everywhere, get into their own disagreements, have their own fights. There are many communities that have had all sorts of different battles within each community. When communities split, members of communities are fighting each other, leaders of communities disagree, communities, disagree, different communities disagree with each other. So that's a problem everywhere. Jews have always struggled to get along. That's an old story, I guess, for humans in general. It's not unique to Jews. Now, in the United States, as I mentioned before, there's a very strong anti-Haredi bigotry, especially among the elite in New York. Remember, Chareidim make up about 7-8% of New York City's population. So there is a very significant minority in New York City, right? Very significant voting bloc too, right? If you think of voting blocks, and New York is all voting blocks. I lived there for a few years, right? It's all about the various different communities. So, they're very large community, but the elite in New York, who control the city, as in most places, have a very strong anti-Haredi bigotry. Many of these elite are Jewish. And this has led to countless anti-Haredi articles in New York-based media. Much of our media in this country is based in New York, from the New York Times to the Associated Press to CNN to so many other parts of our media that are New York-based. And the journalists tend to be members of the New York elite, and there's a very strong anti-Haredi bigotry in New York. And that's led to a lot of anti-Haredi articles in the papers. As it's been pointed out time and again, New York Times, which includes every minority in New York among those that write and edit the paper in order to represent all the different groups, doesn't have, although Haredi make up 6 or 7% of the city, they don't have a single Haredi writer or editor, right? Which says a lot, right? That might explain why they refuse to drop the offensive term ultra-Orthodox. There's also in recent years been an explosion of anti-Haredi films and documentaries that have been made. And they're mostly made by disgruntled former Chareidim. Various people have left the Haredi community for various personal reasons, whether they left Judaism altogether, they didn't kind of reject the Jewish practice, or they didn't like their particular community, or whatever it may have been. And often they're disgruntled. And many of them have made anti-Haredi films. And so there's this very strong anti-Haredi bigotry as a result in this country. In other words, people have these very anti-Haredi views. In other words, they think of them as horrible people, as backwards people, and the like, which is totally not true and not fair. In a country where we're trying to be welcoming and understanding of every minority group or every unique community, for whatever reason, Haredim get left out. I guess in the same way that anti-Semitism, right, is not a accepted form of bigotry in this country, is not a defined form of bigotry in this country. There are, though, these common accusations that keep coming up again and again against the Haredi community. One main accusation that keeps coming up is that people are forced to be part of the community. Right? People are tied, locked into the community, locked into unhappy marriages. The problem of people being locked into unhappy marriages, unfortunately, exists everywhere. because when you're stuck in a bad marriage, it's hard to get out. That's true wherever you are, right? Unfortunately, it's gotten a lot easier thanks to in modern times, but that's a challenge everywhere. Now, the truth is, of course, that living in a free country, fairly free country, people can come and go as they wish. Plenty of people have left the Haredi community over the years. Demographers have kind of tried to get exact numbers. There's a certain percentage. It's a small percent, 2%, 3%, it's a small percent, but a certain percentage that grow up Haredi do leave. And many people join the Haredi community. Many people that grew up either modern Orthodox or non-observant at all join the Haredi community. There's a very significant number of what's called Baalei Tshuva, people that joined the Haredi lifestyle later in life. Again, you could come and go as you will. Now, it's always hard to leave your community. It's hard to reject your family's lifestyle. They may or may not be accepting of your rejection of their lifestyle. That depends on the individual family, right? Often, there's other people that want to leave. There's often other issues involved, maybe abuse or other problems, which, are an issue as well. It's hard to leave abuse too. So, but we live in a pretty free country, and anyone's free to go and come as they please. And yet, it's hard to change your lifestyle and change your community, no matter where you are. But there's no one holding a gun to your head and not allowing you to leave. Another accusation that's been coming up again and again, particularly in New York, is the lower level of general education in many Haredi schools. Now, it varies dramatically from school to school. Some schools have fairly high level of general education. Some have lower levels of general education. In the United States, they all have general education. In Israel, most do, but not all do. The thing is that regardless of the level of general education, the parents choose. The reason why all Haredi schools have a significant stress on Jewish education, which means less hours for general education, and parents who are sending their children to these schools choose to do so willingly. And here in the United States, they're paying tuition because they're not getting government funding for the school. So they're paying a fortune in tuition, right? They're paying a very, very large amount in tuition and voluntarily sending their children to these schools. They don't have to. They could send to any other school they want. They could send to another Jewish school if they want, another Jewish elite school. If they want, they could send to public school. I mean, it's a free country. You could do whatever you want. Again, Haredi values would frown on it, but that's their choice of lifestyle to live. And again, it's really, if someone chooses to give their child a particular education or send their child to a particular school, that's their life choice to make. It's really unfair to condemn them for it. They made that lifestyle choice. And I do believe that we should allow parents to choose what's best for their children, almost all the time, except for very, very rare instances where parents are abusing their children, because usually the government or the public don't know what's best for your children. And if we gave the children over to the government, they probably won't do the best job. Another challenge that has come up repeatedly in the United States is the Haredi community is growing very quickly. And as a result, they're moving into the various communities. And there's this fear of Haredi takeover of people's communities. They're afraid too many are going to move in and they're going to take over my city, and they're all essentially, my city is going to become majority Haredi. That's somewhat of a bigoted view. It's very reminiscent of the way of the white flight back in the 1960s, when African Americans would move into communities, and everyone was afraid of the blacks taking over their community, and they would try to keep them out of their communities. And it's frankly bigoted. There's no reason why we can't all live together nicely. There's also a lot of so those are the controversies here in the United States. Most of them are, as I've just explained, are pretty unfair. There are also controversies in Israel. Now, in Israel, the Chareidim make up a significant part of not just the Jewish community, as they do here, but a significant part of the country, right? So they make up about more than 15% of the country. They're a significant voting bloc. In Israel, they have their own parties, and they have their own political parties, and they have their own interests and needs. So there's a number of controversies with the Haredi community in Israel, and I'm going to address them really briefly. I'm not going to get into them. Maybe some of them we could talk about afterwards if someone's really interested. So the Haredi community are voters like anyone else, and pay taxes like anyone else, and have the right to vote and have the right to have a say in how their country runs. There are a number of, though, complaints of non-Haredis to the Haredi. One big issue that comes up again and again, like here, is the Haredi neighborhoods. And that is that non-Haredim don't like Haredim moving into their neighborhood. Again, they're afraid of the neighborhood changing. They're afraid of different interests and different changes in the neighborhood, which again, I believe we all know today is a bigoted view, and should never be acceptable not to want certain people to move into your neighborhood. Another big issue in Israel is the military draft. Israel has a military draft for men and for women in Israel. Now, Jewish law bans women from serving in the military. Why is a subject of its own, but that is a very clear Jewish law. Therefore, as a rule, all observant Jewish women of any Chareidim or non-Chareidim in Israel do not serve in the military. And there was a big fight over it in the early days of the state, and the compromise was that there's a draft, but any Jewish woman could get out of the draft by saying that it goes against her beliefs. And so all observant Jewish women in Israel do not serve in the military. Some do civil service, but they all don't serve in the military. Now, for Jewish men, so there's a law in Jewish law, and this is really kind of true in just about every country, that those studying in religious schools, in yeshivas, are exempt from a draft. And this is true in this country. When we had a draft, those that were studying in religious seminaries were exempt from the draft here as well, when we had a draft of any religion, because we recognize, it's a religious exemption, that we want people to be able to, dedicate their life to their religion. So when Israel first became a state, the Haredi community was fairly small. There was a exception made for the draft, essentially, that anyone studying in yeshiva was able to get a deferment from their draft until they finish studying in yeshiva. And that remains true today, although the Haredi community has grown, that anyone studying in yeshiva can get a deferment from the draft until they finish their study in yeshiva. Most Haredim do that, get a deferment. The draft in Israel is at 18 years old. You can also in Israel get a deferment from the draft if you want to go to college. Most choose not to. Most prefer to first serve in the military and then go to college. You get discounts on college that way. Some first go to college and then go to the draft. There's an advantage. You can then go straight to officers school, like here. But you could defer also for college. You could defer to go to yeshiva in Israel as well. There's a challenge, though. A significant percentage of Haredi men go to yeshiva for a couple years and then go to the military. There is a significant percentage of Haredim in Israel that do not, even after that do not go to the draft. And it's for one of two reasons. There's a small segment of the Haredi community, a significantly small segment, maybe 10% or less, that are anti-Zionist. In other words, they don't recognize the state. They don't take any money from the state, right? Those Chareidim don't take any money. They don't take any personal public funds for their organizations, for their schools, for anything, nor do they serve the state. And so they don't go to the military. That's a small segment. There's a much larger segment of the Haredi community. This is mostly from the Litvish community that I mentioned earlier, that the non-Hasidic community, that believe that Jewish men should study Torah for a decade, 2 decades of their lives. So they stay in yeshiva and continue deferring for a decade or 2 decades. By the time they're out of yeshiva, they're already too old to be drafted. So many in Israel feel that the Chareidim are not, should be going to the draft and are not going to the draft and are getting out of it, and a significant percentage do. And that's an issue of contention in Israel, and there's been various solutions offered. Unfortunately, politics and whatever has not allowed. They've tried to make compromises, and because of politics and various other reasons, compromises have never come to fruition. Another accusation against Chareidim in Israel is that Chareidim don't work. And again, this is true, as I mentioned. Most Chareidim in Israel do work and do have jobs. And there is, though, a significant percentage of the Haredi community, mostly the Litvish community, that study in yeshiva for a decade or 2 decades. So until they're 30, 40, they're still in yeshiva, and they're not working. And they, only begin to work at 40. Some continue in yeshiva for life. And so as a result, they're living, their wives are working, they're living off government social benefits. They're living off donations. Maybe a lot of them work part-time. And so that's a complaint that many complain, that Chareidim are not working. It's that some Chareidim are not working. Again, it's not all. That's, I guess, on the one hand, it's people feel it's not good for the economy. It's unfair that others should have to support their families. On the other hand, the public support is very, very minimal, and these are people who chose to live their life that way. So those are the primary controversies in Israel. There are also other controversies in Israel, and that is different. Given that both Chareidim and non-Chareidim in Israel have political representation, there's some debate in politics over funding for their institutions. Chareidim feel that their schools should be funded just like non-Haredi schools. The non-Chareidim feel that our schools are only teaching or minimal Jewish subjects and only teaching general subjects. And why should we fund schools that are teaching half-a-day Jewish subjects or more than half-a-day Jewish subjects? But the Chareidim say, well, we're paying taxes too, right? Why should we not get our schools funded? So there's a big debate over Jewish schooling. Today, most Haredi schools are funded about 80, 90%, not 100%. But it varies from school to school because it's a very complicated system. There's also some debate about funding culture. Chareidim are more interested in funding Haredi culture, which often involves Torah-centered things, religious-centered things. The others in Israel are more interested in funding sports and funding, other cultural, television and things that they're into. So there's a lot of debate like that over funding. Chareidim also tend to have large families. So there's a debate, just as there is here, how much subsidies there should be, how much the government should encourage larger families, how much child subsidies should be for those that are less fortunate. And so that's, again, another issue of contention in Israel. One more issue that's come up of contention again and again is Chareidim, who have grown and have now a lot of cultural activities, want to be able to have Haredi concerts put on by Haredi singers with men and women dancing separately, as Chareidim do. And the non-Chareidim say, that's bigotry, separating men and women, and why should we allow it? It should be illegal. So those are some of the controversies they have in Israel, and unfortunately, I think due to the controversies, there's a lot of hatred, particularly among non-Chareidim for Chareidim. I don't think it's so much the other way, but I think that animosity has led to the inability to find compromise and learn to work together, and so that's been a challenge. So that's just a very short explanation of the controversies in Israel. But the Haredi communities have, and there are a big percentage of Jewish life. They've essentially preserved Torah and Torah-centered life the way Jews have lived for thousands of years. There's some debate among sociologists whether Haredim is a new phenomena or it once existed always. It's new in the sense that Haredim adapted Jewish life to modern times. So we have modern schools instead of the old way that they used to teach in the old country. We have modern communities. So we've modernized in many ways, and yet Chareidim still retain strong aspects of Jewish culture and reject the parts of culture of modern culture that are not in line with Haredi values. And so, but they've retained a Torah-centered life. Chareidim generally, as we said, have beautiful large families. spend a lot of time on chesed, on kindness, helping each other, have many, many mutual aid organizations. And they're a great example of a positive life of Jews. And although there are a lot of these stereotypes and negative stereotypes, as I've explained, I don't think most of them are true. There are, of course, bad apples. But they are really a great example of what it's like to live a traditional Jewish life, and how how an ideal Jewish life should be, and they're living really a modern version of how our ancestors have lived for generations. Regardless, Chareidim are by far the fastest growing Jewish demographic. Unfortunately, secular Jews or non-observant Jews are shrinking at a very fast rate due to assimilation and due to a general shrinking birth rate. Many in the United States in general, we have a shrinking birth rate. Many don't get married. Many don't have children. Chareidim tend to have large families, and as a result, they're by far the fastest growing Jewish demographic, and they are without a doubt the future of Judaism. In other words, in 30 years from now, 40 years from now, Chareidim will be a much, much larger segment of the Jewish community, given their fast growth rate and the rest of the Jewish community's shrink rate. Within about 20 years or so, there'll be a majority in England, and it will become in time what it means to be Jewish. I mean, you never know the future, right? No one can predict the future, but it definitely is the future, and it's a beautiful future. It's a beautiful lifestyle, and hopefully this class served to, for those that don't know Chareidim or don't know Chareidim from the inside, serve to help you better understand Haredi lifestyle, and really what a big segment of the Jewish community is like.
They always look beautifully dressed. In England,
they're always beautifully dressed.
The men are always immaculate.
Again, you can't generalize. Every person's different.
In England, when I was growing up, there wasn't any of them, and now there's most of the Jewish community where I grew up, all of them.
Yes.
Why are they dressed, maybe? Now, you know what I mean? Nice, smart. They look nice.
The majority of Jewish children in England born today are Haredi, and the same is in the New York area. In the New York area, majority are Haredi. If Haredim stay there and don't move out, if Haredim stay there, then it's a matter of time till they're a majority in the New York area. But there's been some big changes recently. I didn't talk about it, but the biggest issue that faces the Haredi community is in the United States is tuition for education. In other words, you have a number of children and you're paying, as I am, tens of thousands of dollars in tuition. It becomes a very, very big percentage of your expenses. And your lifestyle would be totally different if you didn't have to pay it. There's been a number of states, and so for that reason, the number one political wish of Chareidim is public funding for education, for private education. There's been a number of states that have done that in recent years. Texas, Arizona, Florida, a number of other states have brought what's called school choice. And that has made a huge difference because in Florida now, your tuition is, and especially if it's means tested, it's somewhat helpful. If it's not means tested, such as in Florida where they just give across the board, you get a certain amount that that can cover your own private school tuition. It means that your tuition costs are down 80%. And that's a huge lifestyle change. And as a result of that, there's been a huge Haredi move to Florida in the last 2-3 years since it passed, and it's almost certainly going to continue and grow.
I don't think they're so poor because they bought all the big houses in Manchester where I come from.
So that's a great question.